We've talked about lots of CDR topologies, but we never talk about the clock choice between the full-rate CDR and the half-rate CDR. Then, we will describe those two topologies in detail, and then you will make your own decision easily. In this video, we only focus on one full-rate CDR, but keep in mind that the full-rate is not best without any drawbacks. So, as usual, we will talk about why half-rate CDR in the next video. Let's start to review the band CDR and the full-rate we've known. To capture the phase tracking or recovery, both the timing images and the target band transfer curve between the input phase error and average output voltage would help you easily understand. Again, since we only need to know if the clock is early or late, not a phase amount of early or late, we could make use of the transition sample T as a baseline criterion from the waveform image. Obviously, the transition sample T embedded the clock transition information. In this timing image of a full-rate clock, the clock period is the same as the data's every bit period over one unit interval UI. Then, we should have one half UI sample D or leg the transition sample T, which is called A and B data samples. If the clock phase is earlier, then both the data sample A and the transition sample T would have the same sign, but different polarity from the data sample B. On the other hand, if the clock phase is later, both the data sample B and the transition sample T would have the same sign, but different polarity from the data sample A. Therefore, an XOR for the A and T may provide the late clock information to push the VCO run faster, and another XOR for the T and B may provide the early clock information to push the VCO to run slower for the clock phase correction. After checking all the waveforms and the timing images, could you please come up with the corresponding circuit images for 5 seconds? Bingo! Those flip-flops FF1, FF2, and FF3 capture every half UI consecutive sample data of the input data D in. The FF2 must sample the D in by the falling edge of the clock, but the output transition sample T must be resampled by the rising edge of the clock to align with the data sample A and B. Resample transition data through the FF4 is called TRS. Again, the aligned path value of A, TRS, and B will conclude if the clock is early or late. For example, both A and TRS are the same, but different from the B. The clock would be early and was indicated by the XOR output of the TRS and B. Similarly, both TRS and B are the same, but different from the A. The clock would be late and was indicated by the XOR output of the A and TRS. For negative feedback to correct the phase error, we will apply the late minus early to be the output voltage to drive the VCO's phase adjustment, such that the up or +1 signal would drive the VCO faster if the clock phase is later than the input data, and vice versa. After understanding the full-rate timing and circuit block, we can explore how we would meet the half-rate timing and its corresponding circuit block. In this timing image of the half-rate clock, the clock period is the choice of the data's every bit period, or 1 UI. Then, for the data sample A and B, we could apply the differential clocking, which is the rising edge and falling edge clock, to sample the two consecutive data, respectively. What can we do for the transition sample T? Think about the interpolation images for 5 seconds. Great. You can apply the phase interpolator or inherent multi-phase VCO outputs to provide the extra quadruple phase 90-degree clocking, which should be exactly the middle phase of the 0 degree and 180 degree ideally. Then, for the rest of the band, the early late operation in the half rate will be exactly the same as the full rate without any difference. Could you please come up with the corresponding half rate circuit image for 5 seconds? Right, you can just use 3 flip-flops to sample A, T, B by clocking 0, 90, 180 degree phases respectively. After A, T, B are available, can we do the XOR to figure out early, late? Sorry, not yet. As the full-rate phase detector PD, we still need to align all the data after resampling the A, T, B and the same clock domain. Therefore, one more retiming stage is needed. What's more? Think about the input swing image of D for 5 seconds. Great. The input swing of the band PD should be at a CML level, which is not usually big enough after big channel loss and the gain limited CML buffer like CTOE and VGA. Then we may need the sampler not only to sample the input D in, but also convert the CML level to CMOS level. What's the sampler? Correct. Strong arm latch. We will talk about for a while. Then we should put all the complete blocks for band PD CDR in both full-rate and half-rate clocking now. From the first quick image, which topology do you prefer? Think about the image of simplicity for 5 seconds. Yes, a full-rate CDR looks comfortable since it's simple and low cost. For example, the full-rate CDR requires fewer blocks to generate the multiple clock phases than the half-rate CDR. The full-rate CDR can lead to a low cost in the design development and chip area than the half-rate one. What's more, relating to the simplicity over impairment image, which could be a trade-off? Bingo! The beauty of the simplicity applies to circuit design pretty well. The more blocks you add, the more impairments exist, the less robust ends up. As you can see, the full-rate clocking only requires a differential clock, which is available in either LC or ring PLs naturally without adding any complexity. In addition, the phase accuracy can be self-maintained easy by balancing the loads and buffers easy. On the other hand, the full phase may need a full phase generation from either a phase interpolator PI or a DL, which not only consumes more power, but also adds risk in the phase accuracy impairments to degrade the system robustness. In terms of robustness, what else could degrade the CDR performance? Yes, latency. The full-rate CDR has a lower latency than the half-rate CDR. For example, the delay of a back-to-back sample is 1 UI in a full-rate clocking, but 2 UI in a half-rate clocking. Also, we've known in the wide low latency video, a less latency will improve the stability and increase the J-tau. In addition to the latency, what else could have an impact of the J-tau? Think about the phase accuracy image for 5 seconds. Great. The phase accuracy for the full-rate is an issue or concern as well. But it's easier to maintain or correct the phase accuracy of the differential phase than the full phases. Therefore, the transition sample of the half-rate has more chance to shift the wrong position than the full-rate one, no matter the transition T is closer to the A or B, and even lead to more early or more late decisions. The whole wrong decision will eventually result in a more big error rate or a less J-tau due to the higher hunting jitter or equivalent less eye width. In addition to the transition sample, what else could degrade the J-tau? Think about the big array image for 5 seconds. Bingo! Assume the clock phase of the transition sample is very accurate. Then, that means the duty cycle of the full-rate clock is perfectly 50%, and the clock period should be correct by the PL loop. Therefore, you should not see the shifting data sample A and B. So, the B array should be minimized, or the jitter tolerance J-tau is the maximum. But for the half-rate, even though the clock phase of the transition sample at 90 degree is perfectly aligned at the transition, the 0 degree phase CKI could be study advanced, and the 180 degree phase CKI bar could be study lag. In other words, the duty cycle of the half-rate clock could be greater than 50%. Therefore, the data sample error could also reduce the J-tau or increase the bit array due to the even odd sample mismatch. Obviously, both A and B are closer to the transition and should have a less equivalent eye width margin for the target bit array. In addition to the PPA consideration, what else could be the benefit of the full-rate compared to the half-rate? Yes, scalability. As we discussed before, the full-rate series can be upgraded to a double data rate in a half-rate series topology. Therefore, the CDR block inside the series should also have the same scalable feature. For example, we can keep 8 GHz clocking for the 16 gigabit per second PCIe 4 at the half rate for meeting the speed constraint, and switch it to 8 gigabit per second PCIe 3 at the full rate for better J-tau. Here are the summarized images of why we prefer a full-rate CDR. First, simplicity makes us comfortable. So, the more blocks you add, the more impairments exist, the less robust it ends up. The philosophy of circuit design is the beauty of simplicity. The full-rate CDR only require a simple differential clocking, which is available from any VCO. But the half-rate CDR may require multi-phase clocking generation from ring oscillator, phase interpreter, DLL, or any extra blocks. Then, second, the cost of development design over area could be higher in a half-rate CDR. Third, the risk would be definitely high because of less robustness under many blocks. Fourth, the power of the full-rate could even lower than the half-rate if we did not deal with the overhead of the half-rate carefully. Fifth, the lower latency of the full-rate could even improve the CDR stability and J tau at the same time. Also, sixth, the full-rate CDR is easier to keep a good phase accuracy, only differential, than the half-rate, and the full-rate CDR would have a low bit error rate, hunting jitter, and a greater J tau than the half-rate. Lastly, starting with the full-rate CDR can scale to a double rate, but keep the same clock rate in a half-rate migration. Thanks for watching. Before you go, if you are benefiting from those circuit images, I would love to hear your feedback, and please share your comments down below. Lastly, please share the video with the people who may be benefit from it.